The familiar hum of laboratory equipment filled the air as Evan Hayes carefully adjusted his microscope's focus. The delicate alien flora specimen beneath the lens showed promising medicinal properties, its cellular structure unlike anything he'd encountered in his 15 years as a research scientist. Here on Research Station Epsilon, located on the distant world of Kepler 442b, every day brought new discoveries. A sudden crash from the station's entrance module shattered his concentration. Evan's head snapped up, his heart racing. He wasn't due for a supply drop for another 3 weeks, and no other researchers were scheduled to arrive at this remote outpost. Security feed, entrance module, he commanded. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a slumped figure by the airlock. Whoever, or whatever, it was appeared to be in distress. Against all safety protocols, Evan grabbed a medical kit and rushed to the entrance. The rational part of his mind screamed at him to follow quarantine procedures, but something about the desperate way the figure had collapsed compelled him to act quickly. As the airlock cycled, he got his first clear look at the visitor. His breath caught in his throat. She was humanoid but clearly alien. Her skin had an opalescent quality that seemed to shift colors in the station's harsh lighting, and her hair moved like liquid starlight despite the artificial gravity. She wore what appeared to be some kind of environmental suit, now damaged and torn in several places. "Hold on," Evan said, kneeling beside her. "I'm here to help." Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises of the deepest violet he'd ever seen. "Please," she whispered, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance that sent shivers down his spine. "Help me." He helped her to the medical bay, noting how she seemed to lean into his touch more than necessary for support. Once he had her on the examination table, he began running basic diagnostic scans. "I'm Evan Hayes," he said, trying to keep her conscious and talking. "Can you tell me your name?" "Calith," she managed between labored breaths. "Calith Vera." She reached out suddenly, grabbing his wrist. The moment their skin made contact, her breathing eased slightly. Evan noticed something strange. Where their skin touched, her opalescent complexion seemed to stabilize, the shifting colors becoming more harmonious. When he tried to pull away to reach for a different scanner, her condition immediately began to deteriorate. "Please," she gasped, "don't let go. Your touch, it helps." Over the next few hours, Evan ran every non-invasive test he could while maintaining physical contact with Calith. Her vital signs would stabilize when they touched but would begin to crash the moment he broke contact. It defied every medical principle he knew. "You're not just injured, are you?" he finally asked, sitting beside the examination table with his hand still clasped in hers. "There's something else going on here." Calith's violet eyes met his, filled with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. "No, I'm not just injured. But I can't explain everything yet. Please understand. All I can tell you is that your presence, your touch, it brings me relief when nothing else has. Are there others like you? Someone I should contact?" A shadow passed across her face. "No. No contact. Please." She tried to sit up but swayed dangerously. Evan steadied her, and again, he noticed how she seemed to draw strength from his touch. "Easy," he said. "Whatever's going on, you're in no condition to go anywhere right now. You're safe here." "Safe," she repeated the word as if testing its weight. "I haven't felt safe in so long." Her eyes began to drift closed, exhaustion finally overtaking her. "Rest," Evan said softly. "We can talk more when you're stronger." As Calith slipped into sleep, Evan found himself studying her face. Even in unconsciousness, she maintained her grip on his hand, as if afraid he might let go. His mind raced with questions. Who was she? What had happened to her? Why did his touch affect her so dramatically? And most importantly, what was she running from? Because he was certain now that she was running from something. The fear in her eyes when he'd mentioned contacting others, the damaged state of her environmental suit, her reluctance to explain her condition, it all pointed to someone in flight. Looking down at their joined hands, Evan realized his orderly, scientific life had just become vastly more complicated. Every rational instinct told him he should be more cautious, should question everything about this situation. But when Kalitha's hand tightened around his in her sleep, when her breathing steadied at his touch, he knew he was already too invested to turn back. Outside the station's reinforced windows, Kepler 442b's twin moons rose over the horizon, casting a pale blue light across the alien landscape. Somewhere out there were answers to the mystery that had quite literally fallen into his lap. For now, though, all he could do was hold on to the hand of this mysterious woman and hope he hadn't made a terrible mistake in helping her. As the night wore on, Evan couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than either of them. He had no way of knowing then just how right he was, or how his decision to help a stranger would change not only his life but the fate of an entire species. Days passed like stardust through an hourglass at Research Station Epsilon. Evan had converted part of his living quarters into a recovery room for Kalith, knowing she needed to stay close. The mysterious connection between them had only grown stronger, and he found himself constantly aware of her presence, as if an invisible thread bound them together. One evening, as they sat in the station's observation dome watching the aurora dance across Kepler 442b's sky, Kalith finally began to open up. "My people," she said softly, her hand naturally finding its way into his, "we call ourselves the Lyrians. We were once a great civilization, spanning multiple star systems." She paused, pain flickering across her ethereal features. "Now we're dying." Evan squeezed her hand gently, noting how the shifting colors beneath her skin calmed at his touch. "What happened?" "A plague, of sorts. But not one that attacks the body, at least, not directly." Kalith turned to face him, her violet eyes reflecting the stellar lights above. "It began subtly. People started experiencing physical pain when they were alone. At first, we thought it was psychological, a manifestation of loneliness. But it grew worse." She stood, pulling him with her to the dome's window. "Our scientists discovered that our evolutionary path had taken an unexpected turn. Our species had become so emotionally advanced that our physical well-being became directly tied to our emotional connections. Without genuine emotional bonds, our bodies begin to shut down. That's why my touch helps," Evan realized. "But why me specifically? You mentioned there were others who couldn't help." Kalitha's free hand traced patterns on the glass, matching the aurora's dance. "Your biology is unique, Evan. Something in your genetic makeup resonates with our condition. But it's more than that." She turned to him, her expression vulnerable. "The effect is stronger when there's a genuine emotional connection. Others might have provided temporary relief, but you." She trailed off, but Evan understood. Over the past days, he'd found himself drawn to her in ways that went beyond scientific curiosity or medical concern. Her quiet strength, her grace in the face of suffering, the way her laugh seemed to light up the entire station, he was falling for her, despite his attempts to maintain professional distance. "Show me," he said suddenly. "Show me what happens when we're apart." Kalith hesitated. "Evan, I don't want to. Please. I need to understand." Reluctantly, she released his hand and stepped away. Almost immediately, the shifting colors beneath her skin became erratic. Her breathing grew labored, and she swayed on her feet. Evan watched in horror as her condition deteriorated rapidly, but she held up a hand when he moved to help. "This is what we've become," she gasped. "Without connection, we fade." Her knees buckled, and Evan caught her, pulling her close. The moment they touched, her symptoms began to subside. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I shouldn't have asked you to demonstrate." "No," she said, her voice stronger now. You needed to see. To understand why I can't stay here forever, no matter how much I want to. Evan pulled back slightly, studying her face. What do you mean? Kalitha's eyes filled with tears that seemed to shimmer like liquid diamonds. My people are suffering, Evan. I came looking for help, for answers. Finding you it was more than I could have hoped for. But I can't keep you to myself, and my entire species is dying. Then we'll find a way to help them, Evan said firmly. My research here, I've been studying the biological adaptation of species to extreme conditions. Maybe there's something in my work that could. A warning alarm cut him off. The station's proximity sensors had detected something entering orbit. Kalitha's face drained of color. They found me, she whispered. No, it's too soon. I'm not ready. Who found you? Kalith, what aren't you telling me? She gripped his arms, her violet eyes intense. Evan, there's so much more you need to know. About why I really came here, about what's really happening to my people. But right now, we need to move. Those ships belong to people who would use our connection, use you, in ways I can't allow. Evan glanced at his research station, at years of work and discovery. Then he looked at Kalith, at the fear and determination in her eyes, and made his decision. The emergency shuttle, he said. It's stocked and ready. But Kalith? He caught her face between his hands. When we're safe, no more secrets. I need the whole truth. She nodded, leaning into his touch. Everything. I promise. As they rushed to prepare for evacuation, Evan couldn't help but think about how dramatically his life had changed in just a few days. He had come to this remote station seeking scientific discoveries, but instead found himself caught up in something far more profound. The mystery of Kalitha's condition was only deepening, and now unknown pursuers threatened both their lives. Yet as they ran through the station's corridors hand in hand, their footsteps echoing in perfect sync, Evan knew he wouldn't have it any other way. Whatever dangers lay ahead, whatever secrets Kalith still held, they would face them together. Because somewhere between treating her wounds and sharing quiet moments under alien skies, he had crossed a point of no return. He was no longer just her healer or her sanctuary. He had become her hope, just as she had become his purpose. The emergency shuttle hummed softly as it carried them through the star-studded darkness. Evan had programmed a complex flight pattern to throw off their pursuers, but he knew they couldn't run forever. In the co-pilot's seat, Kalith sat with her hand intertwined with his, her opalescent skin reflecting the glow of distant stars. It's time, she said quietly, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. You deserve to know everything. Evan set the shuttle on autopilot and turned to face her fully. I'm listening. Kalith took a deep breath, her violet eyes meeting his. The affliction that plagues my people, it wasn't natural evolution as I led you to believe. It was engineered. Engineered? By whom? By us, she whispered, pain evident in her voice. Our scientists sought to advance our species, to create beings capable of deeper emotional connections than any race had ever known. They succeeded, but at a terrible cost. She stood, pacing the small cabin while maintaining her grip on Evan's hand. The modification altered our very cellular structure. Our bodies became dependent on emotional energy, specifically, the energy generated by genuine care and affection. Without it, we begin to fade. But why would anyone do this deliberately? Evan asked, trying to comprehend the magnitude of such a decision. Pride. Ambition. Fear. Kalitha's free hand clenched into a fist. Our civilization was beginning to fracture. Different factions were growing apart, emotional distances becoming physical conflicts. The scientists believed that making us physically dependent on emotional connections would force our people to maintain strong bonds, to prevent war and dissolution. That's horrifying, Evan said, pulling her closer. To force an entire species into emotional dependence. It worked, at first, Caliph continued. Our people drew closer together, knowing we needed each other to survive. But then we discovered the true horror of what had been done to us. Those who had no one to bond with began to die. Children born to emotionally distant parents struggled to thrive. And worst of all. She paused, tears shimmering in her eyes. What? Evan prompted gently. The modification is evolving. Each generation needs stronger connections to survive. Simple friendship or familial love is no longer enough for many of us. We need deep, genuine, romantic love to maintain our health. She turned to him, her expression haunted. That's why your kiss brings me such relief, Evan. Your feelings for me, they're pure, untainted by obligation or duty. Do you understand now why I was so afraid to tell you? Your affection literally keeps me alive. Evan sat in stunned silence, processing the implications. The weight of responsibility settled heavy on his shoulders. Every touch, every kiss they'd shared had been sustaining her life. Was their growing love even real, or was it born of desperate necessity? As if reading his thoughts, Caliph cupped his face with her free hand. What I feel for you is real, Evan. The affliction doesn't create false emotions, it only makes us physically dependent on genuine ones. Every moment with you, every feeling that has grown between us, has been true. And the ships following us? Evan asked, though he was beginning to understand. The sanctuary, Caliph said, bitterness creeping into her voice. They believe they're saving our species. They've created facilities where our people are paired with compatible beings from other races, maintaining just enough emotional connection to keep us alive. But it's a hollow existence, living on scraps of affection from strangers who are coerced or paid to care. They want me, Evan realized. Because I'm unusually compatible. Yes. Your genetic makeup, combined with your capacity for genuine empathy, makes you incredibly valuable to them. They would force you to become a donor, providing emotional energy to sustain multiple Lyrians. She gripped his hand tighter. I won't let that happen to you. I won't let them turn what we have into something clinical and corrupt. The shuttle's proximity alarm blared, interrupting their conversation. Multiple ships had appeared on the long-range scanners, closing in fast. The sanctuary, Caliph confirmed, fear evident in her voice. They're not giving up. Evan pulled up the navigation controls, plotting possible escape routes. But as he worked, his mind was racing with everything he'd learned. The horrifying experiment that had condemned an entire species to emotional dependence. The corrupt system that had risen to exploit it. And Caliph, caught in the middle, fighting to maintain not just her life but her right to genuine love. We'll find another way, he said firmly, pulling her close. There has to be a solution that doesn't involve enslaving people's emotions or condemning your people to slow death. My research, maybe there's something in the cellular adaptation studies that could. Another alarm cut him off. One of the pursuing ships had launched something toward them. Tractor beam, Caliph said, panic rising in her voice. Evan, if they catch us. They won't, he promised, engaging the shuttle's emergency thrusters. As they accelerated away from their pursuers, he pulled Caliph into a fierce kiss. He poured everything he felt for her into that contact, his growing love, his determination to help, his promise to stand by her regardless of the cost. When they parted, her skin was glowing with stable, harmonious patterns he'd never seen before. That wasn't just for healing, was it? She asked softly. No, he replied, turning back to the controls. That was because I love you. Everything else, the healing, the compatibility, the biology, that's all secondary. I love you, Caliph, and I won't let them turn that love into a resource to be harvested. As they raced through space, pursued by those who would exploit their connection, both knew that everything had changed. The truth was out, the stakes were clear, and their love had become more than just a personal bond. It was now a symbol of resistance against a system that would commodify the most sacred of emotions. The path ahead was dangerous and uncertain, but they faced it together, their joined hands a defiance of all who would try to turn their love into something less than what it was, a genuine, powerful force that could change not just their lives, but possibly the fate of an entire species. The emergency shuttle screamed through the atmosphere of Proxima b, its hull glowing red-hot from the entry. Evan's knuckles were white on the controls as he guided them through the turbulence, while Caleth worked frantically at the navigation console, her free hand never leaving his shoulder. There, she pointed to a massive forest of crystalline trees that sparkled under the red dwarf sun. The crystal forest will interfere with their tracking systems. Evan banked hard, diving toward the alien landscape. Behind them, 3 sanctuary vessels pursued like predatory birds, their tractor beams cutting through the clouds. The shuttle's warning systems blared as another beam nearly caught them. "Hold on!" Evan called out as he threaded their ship between the towering crystal structures. The trees rose hundreds of meters into the sky, their crystalline branches creating a maze of reflective surfaces and dangerous obstacles. A sharp turn brought them too close to one of the trees. The crystal branch scraped along their hull with a horrifying screech, but the damage indicators remained green. Above them, their pursuers were forced to slow down, their larger ships less maneuverable in the dense forest. "We need to find somewhere to land," Caleth said, studying the terrain maps. "The shuttle's power cells are depleting fast from all the evasive maneuvers." Evan nodded, feeling the drain in the ship's responsiveness. "Any suggestions?" "There's a network of caves beneath the crystal forest. If we can reach them." She suddenly gasped, her grip on his shoulder tightening. The separation during their escape had taken its toll, and she needed more than just casual contact now. Without hesitation, Evan pulled her into his lap, positioning her so she could maintain maximum skin contact while he flew. The effect was immediate, her breathing steadied, and the erratic patterns beneath her skin calmed. "I'm sorry," she whispered against his neck. "I'm making it harder for you to fly." "You're keeping me focused," he corrected her, steering them through another tight gap between the crystal trees. "We do this together or not at all." A blast from one of the pursuing ships struck a nearby crystal tree, sending fragments raining down on their shuttle. The crystalline shards pinged off their hull like lethal hail. Evan dove lower, using the denser parts of the forest for cover. "There." Caleth pointed to a dark opening at the base of a massive crystal formation. "That cave entrance should be large enough for the shuttle." Evan aimed for the opening, but another blast rocked their ship. Warning lights flashed across the console, their right thruster was damaged. The shuttle began to spin, and Evan fought for control. "We're going to have to make a rough landing," he warned, using the shuttle's remaining thruster to angle their descent. "Brace yourself." They hit the ground hard, skidding across the crystalline surface before coming to rest just inside the cave entrance. The impact would have thrown Caleth clear if she hadn't been holding on to Evan. As the dust settled, they could hear the sanctuary ships passing overhead, unable to detect them through the crystal interference. "Are you all right?" Evan asked, checking Caleth for injuries. She nodded, then looked at the shuttle systems. "The ship's damaged beyond quick repair. We'll have to continue on foot." They gathered what supplies they could carry and emerged into the alien landscape. The crystal forest was even more spectacular from the ground, with light from the red dwarf sun creating rainbow cascades through the translucent structures. As they made their way deeper into the cave system, Evan noticed something odd about the crystals. "These formations, they're not random. Look at the patterns, they're too regular." Caleth studied the walls. "You're right. These tunnels, they're artificial. But they're ancient, far older than my people's presence in this system." They walked hand in hand through the crystalline corridors, their path lit by the bioluminescent moss that grew in patches along the walls. Evan found himself studying the moss with professional interest, noting how it seemed to respond to their presence. "This is extraordinary," he said, taking samples when they stopped to rest. "The moss appears to be sensitive to emotional energy, similar to how your people's biology works now. And look at these cellular structures." Caliph watched him work, a small smile playing on her lips. "Even running for our lives, you can't stop being a scientist." "That's exactly what we need right now," he replied, excitement building in his voice. "Your people's condition, it's not completely artificial. The scientists who modified your species must have based their work on something that already existed in nature. If we can understand how this moss processes emotional energy without becoming dependent on it." He was interrupted by distant echoes of boots on crystal. The sanctuary forces had found the cave system. Quickly packing his samples, Evan pulled Caliph deeper into the tunnels. They ran through the ancient corridors, taking turns at random, trying to lose their pursuers in the maze-like structure. But the sounds behind them grew closer, and Caliph was weakening. The stress and fear were amplifying her need for emotional connection. Finally, they reached a vast chamber deep underground. Crystal columns rose from floor to ceiling, and in the center stood something that made them both stop in awe, a massive crystalline structure that pulsed with its own inner light. "It's some kind of ancient emotional energy processor," Evan realized, his scientific mind racing. The moss, the crystals, this entire complex was built to harvest and store emotional energy naturally. "Like a battery," Caliph whispered, moving closer to the structure. "But more than that. Look how it's channeling the energy, purifying it." The sound of their pursuers echoed closer. They were running out of time. Evan looked at his samples, at the ancient machine, and at Caliph, and suddenly everything clicked into place. "This is it," he said urgently. "This is how we save your people. Not through forced bonds or emotional slavery, but by understanding how this system processes emotional energy naturally. If we can adapt this technology." A voice rang out through the chamber, "Don't move." Sanctuary forces began pouring in from multiple entrances, weapons raised. Evan pulled Caliph close, shielding her with his body. They were cornered, but he wasn't giving up. In his pocket, the moss samples pulsed with borrowed emotional energy, and behind them, the ancient machine hummed with power accumulated over millennia. "Trust me," he whispered to Caliph. She answered by pulling him into a kiss that sent waves of energy cascading through the crystal chamber. The ancient machine responded, its glow intensifying, and Evan knew they had one chance to turn this trap into salvation, not just for them, but for all of Caliph's people. The chamber erupted with light as their love story entered its most dangerous chapter yet. The ancient chamber pulsed with blinding light, the crystalline structure responding to the pure emotional energy generated by Evan and Caliph's connection. The sanctuary forces shielded their eyes, momentarily stunned by the display. "The machine," Evan shouted over the humming energy. "It's not just storing emotional energy, it's amplifying it, purifying it." He pulled out his samples of the bioluminescent moss, which were now glowing intensely. "The entire system is a natural processor for emotional energy." Commander Rexith of the Sanctuary Forces stepped forward, his weapon still trained on them. "Step away from the artifact. You don't understand what you're dealing with." "No, you don't understand," Caliph countered, her voice strong despite her weakened state. "We've found what our ancestors overlooked. A natural solution to our condition." Evan's scientific mind was racing, connecting the pieces. "Your scientists tried to force emotional evolution, but nature had already created a perfect system for processing and sharing emotional energy. These crystals, this moss, they're part of a vast natural network." He turned to the sanctuary forces, still keeping Caliph close. "Your solution of emotional farming is cruel and unnecessary. This complex proves there's another way. Commander Rexith lowered his weapon slightly, curiosity overcoming his militant stance. Explain. The moss absorbs emotional energy and converts it into a form that can be stored in these crystals, Evan explained rapidly. But it doesn't become dependent on it. It's a perfect natural converter. He gestured to the massive crystalline structure. And this machine? It's not just storage, it's a processor. It can purify and distribute emotional energy throughout an entire ecosystem. If we can understand and replicate this system. Kalitha's eyes widened with hope. We could create a treatment, Evan finished. Not a cure that would undo the genetic modifications, they're too deeply embedded in your species now. But a way to process and store emotional energy naturally, ending the forced dependence on direct contact. The chamber hummed louder, as if responding to their realization. The crystal structure's light began to pulse in rhythm with their joined heartbeats. There's still one problem, Commander Rexith said, though he had fully lowered his weapon now. The initial energy required to restart this ancient system, it would take more emotional power than we could safely harvest. Evan looked at Kalith, understanding dawning in his eyes. Not if it's freely given. He stepped toward the central crystal. My compatibility with your biology, my feelings for Kalith, they're unusually strong. If I connect directly with the processor. No. Kalith grabbed his arm. The energy drain could kill you. It's the only way, he said softly, touching her face. My love for you is strong enough to jumpstart the system. Then we do it together, she insisted. My love for you is just as strong. Commander Rexith stepped forward. The legends of our people speak of the ancient ones who built this place. They believed that true love was the purest form of emotional energy. If you're both willing to risk everything. Evan and Kalith looked at each other, no words needed between them. They approached the crystal processor hand in hand. The machine's hum deepened as they drew near, the crystalline structure beginning to resonate with their combined emotional energy. Ready? Evan asked, squeezing her hand. Kalith answered by pulling him into a deep kiss. As their lips met, both placed their free hands on the ancient crystal. Light exploded through the chamber, their love amplified and purified by the processor. The energy coursed through the crystal network, spreading throughout the entire complex. The drain was immense. Evan felt his consciousness flickering as the machine drew on their emotional energy. But Kalith held him tightly, their love creating a circuit that sustained them both. The crystal forests above began to glow, the entire planet coming alive with processed emotional energy. When the light finally faded, they found themselves still standing, still together. The chamber hummed with stable, sustainable energy. Commander Rexitha's handheld scanner showed readings off the scale. It's working, he said in awe. The processor is generating pure, stabilized emotional energy. Enough to sustain our entire species without forced bonds. Kalith stepped away from Evan experimentally. For the first time since he'd met her, she didn't weaken from the separation. The processed energy flowing through the crystal network was supporting her naturally. How do you feel? Evan asked anxiously. Tears of joy rolled down her face. Whole. Free. But. She quickly stepped back into his arms. I still want to be close to you. Not because I need it to survive, but because I love you. The sanctuary forces began to lower their weapons, realizing the magnitude of what had just happened. This discovery would change everything for their species. No more forced emotional farming, no more desperate searching for compatible donors. The ancient complex had shown them a better way. There's so much work to be done, Evan said, looking around at the vast chamber. Understanding this technology, replicating it, setting up distribution networks. Our people will help, Commander Rexith offered. The sanctuary can be reformed, dedicated to maintaining and distributing this natural emotional energy instead of harvesting it from unwilling donors. Caliph looked up at Evan. "Will you stay? Help us rebuild?" He smiled, pulling her close. "Wild horses couldn't drag me away. Besides, there's so much fascinating science to study here. The moss alone could revolutionize our understanding of emotional energy processing." She silenced his scientific excitement with another kiss, one born purely of love rather than necessity. Above them, the crystal forests sparkled with renewed energy, and throughout the cave system, the ancient machinery hummed with the power of pure emotion, finally awakened after millennia of silence. Their love had not only saved them but had shown an entire species a path to freedom. As Evan held Caliph in the glow of the crystal processor, he marveled at how seeking scientific discovery had led him to find something far more precious, a love strong enough to change the world. The end.